I am here to listen and take notes today in case there are, and I'm sure there will be many good ideas about ways that perhaps the institution can help facilitate some of the research challenges I think we'll be talking about today. So Angela, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Meyer. Thank you everyone for spending an hour with us this Friday afternoon. My name is Angela Carter. I use she, her pronouns. Before we dive into the panel discussion today, I want to do a brief access check, let you all know some of the accessibility features that we are using. So you should be able to turn on the Zoom auto captions if you would like to utilize the subtitles or the transcripts, whatever preferences you have there. Dr. Meyer already mentioned we are recording. If you'd like to keep your camera off or use a pseudonym for whatever reason, you're welcome to do that. But of course, we love to communicate non-verbally in whatever ways we can. So if you want to have your camera on, we welcome that as well. I will be putting in the chat all of the questions that I pose to the panelists so that you can read the question if that is more accessible to you. And I think that is all. Are there any other access or support needs we should check in about before we introduce ourselves in the panel? If anything comes up in our time together today, Jennifer Kaufman is here to support us, and we have a few folks, as Dr. Meyer said, watching the chat, so feel free to reach out. So I'll begin by inviting the panelists to introduce themselves and say a bit about what research is to them. I can start by saying a bit more about myself. I'm going to be the moderator today and only chime in here and there. But my name is Angela Carter. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white, queer, disabled woman that was a first-generation college graduate from a low-income family. I am wearing a dark gray cardigan and my red glasses today, and my hair is on the top of my head as a visual description of myself. And for me, research currently is focus groups. In the past, my research has primarily focused on textual and cultural analysis. So I am branching out into new qualitative and quantitative interdisciplinary methods. It's very exciting. And with that, I will pass it on to our first, one of our four amazing panelists for today, Dr. Erin Durbin, to introduce Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin, and I am a white genderqueer person with short brown hair. I like my name instead of pronouns, but they, them pronouns if you're going to use pronouns. I have a collared shirt on with a cool little triangle tie, and I am a faculty member in the Department of Anthropology. I'm an interdisciplinary scholar, and my PhD is in feminist studies. So among, in that interdisciplinary training, I have bits from cultural studies, literary analysis, archival and historical research, including oral histories, and then also ethnographic field work. And today I'll mostly be talking about ethnography.
Thank you, Erin. Erin has been a wonderful colleague and mentor to me with ethnography, so I'm excited to hear what you have to share. I'll now invite Xiaofen Li to introduce themselves.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Xiaofen Li, and you can call me by Lei, and I use she and her pronoun, and I'm Asian, and I have a short bob hair, and I'm not wearing a yellow button-up shirt, and I'm from the speech, language, and hearing sciences department, and my research focus is on stuttering. So for my dissertation study, I'm using the diary method to look at how stuttering changes from day to day. So my research is mostly quantitative, and I also use some experimental methods as well. And I'm learning more about the qualitative methods, and I know that using a combination of methods gives you both the breadth and depth of research findings. So yeah.
Thank you, Lei. I'd like to now invite Jessica Cooley to introduce herself.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jessica Cooley. I am the ACLS postdoctoral fellow with the Liberal Arts Engagement Hub. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a 40-year-old white woman with brown hair who is lushly enfleshed. I am a scholar and curator, so my research really runs the gambit between sort of traditional academic research in libraries and archives, but also includes things like artist studio visits and museum work. And my PhD is in art history and with a focus in crip theory and disability studies.
Thanks, Jessica. We're excited to have you at the U with us. And now I would like to invite the other Jessica, who I am honored to call my work wife, to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am Jessica Horvath Williams. I am finishing the President's Postdoctoral Fellowship in English, and I'll be flipping to tenure track faculty in the spring. What research is to me? So I study the 19th century US. So it's a lot of digital archives. I spend a lot of time with books. that is pretty, not a lot with the people, just a lot with texts, archives, secondary texts, and trying to figure out how to make that accessible as an, oh, I forgot my description. My apologies, everyone. I am a light brownish Black woman. My hair is up in a little poof thing, and I have skulls on my shirt because Halloween is right around the corner. It seemed appropriate. Yeah, I'm autistic, and I also have a chronic illness. So I am queer, I am disabled, I am all of the things. If you have a box to check, chances are I check that box. So, but thinking about research, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is things that have to do with managing executive dysfunction, and building digital knowledge management systems to be able to do the kind of work that is required of me and of all of us by storing a lot of that information outside of my bio brain and into other systems. And what I found is, and then I'll turn it back over to Angela, but what I found is a lot of the systems that I use that are, for instance, prioritization agnostic, or are key term search heavy, or rely on digital notes and things like that, are actually good for everyone, because turns out like my bio brain is really bad at doing certain kinds of things, but most people's bio brains are actually not particularly great at things like storing lots of things in memory and being able to access them. So a lot of the things that I've developed as tools to be able to work with myself are actually good for researchers generally. And that was kind of a cool discovery.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Disability gain, right? The term used in disability culture and studies is the idea that what is good for disabled folks is actually a gain or a benefit for abled folks too, or can be. I am excited to have this conversation with all of you, especially because you have all been in many ways encouraging me to think about these things personally. So I'm excited to have it publicly with so many folks joining us today. So the next question I'm going to pose for our panelists, and I'll put it in the chat, is what barriers to research do you experience or have you experienced? what is inaccessible or has been inaccessible to you in research. And we're going to spend just a little bit of time kind of naming these barriers so that folks in the who are in the Zoom room or might be watching this later on can get an idea of what those barriers are. So if you're not used to thinking about access barriers, you might not know what comes up for folks in research. So just a little bit of time on this, and then we'll spend the majority of our time today talking about what has helped or what we can do or implement both individually and in our units and at the institutional level. So with that, I am going to volunteer Erin to be first again. And then from there, if anyone else just wants to jump in, you're welcome to just jump in.
It's okay. I like being volunteered. So barriers to research. So in anthropology and people who do ethnographic field work, the model of how that was developed is that there was usually a white guy who would go out of the country, live there for a couple years and collect research. He did the research alone, but usually he was accompanied by his wife who was doing all the reproductive labor. And what that model is like is that people who engage in ethnography typically use hypermobility to navigate around other people's immobilities. And so I have been thinking, about how to flip that, but that's like just the model is set up that way. There's lots of things have changed about ethnography for better or worse that have made it more accessible. Ethnography happens everywhere, which is great. So it can happen where you live, but there are very many expenses to going out of the country and doing this kind of research. And so that's inaccessible for everybody. Some of the things that make ethnographic research inaccessible. So I have chronic illnesses. I have multiple autoimmune syndrome, which is a cluster of autoimmune disorders that include physical disabilities, but also just a lot of medical engagement. And times when I'm not available to do research, and that is not predictable. So part of this model is that people would usually go out in the field and do research every day and respond when people are available to do things right then. And so it's the people who have done this are like workaholics. And there's in anthropology a lot of praise to people who put themselves in harm's way to do research. And I did research in Haiti for a very long time. And then as my illnesses became more apparent and developed more, I wasn't able to do that. And that is for many different reasons, both in Haiti, but then also in my own body, that I am very involved in I have a lot of doctors. I need to stay close to home. And that's really important for me in a way that it didn't used to be. I also have a very specialized diet that makes that helps with my autoimmune symptoms. And so it makes just going out in the world a very big effort. And so my research and everything is more planned. And I'll tell you how I've worked around these things and then other things. But I've found that field work has lots of different kinds of barriers. And so those are some of the ones that I've been up against. For the project I'm going to mention, I also did archival research that was collaborative. So I'll mention actually a very something that is worth noting is that archival research has lots of barriers too. I mean, they're very difficult spaces to be in. and to get access to. When I was doing a lot of archival research, I also had a newborn, which was it was hard in a way where I could like take my kid in the field. That's not true of archives. And I think that that's worth mentioning, that even recently when I've done that, archives haven't, they're not kid friendly, family friendly. I'll just put that into the conversation.
Thanks so much, Erin. Lei, do you want to mention a few barriers that you've experienced?
Yeah, I can jump in here. So I didn't mention my impairment at the beginning, but I do not have an impairment that interferes how I perceive information. So I don't have a visual or hearing impairment, so I can see fine and I can hear fine. And I also don't have an impairment that interfere how I write. So I don't have a motor issue that interfere how I type. And as we all know, being a researcher, we're mostly like a writer, so we write a lot. And I also don't have a cognitive or learning disability that may influence how I process information. And my impairment is more about how I express myself and how I deliver information. And also stuttering is on a spectrum. So there are people with very severe stuttering when they may have trouble getting a couple of words out without either blocking a sound or repeating a sound or prolonging a sound. So my stuttering is at more towards the mild and moderate kind of severity level. So I feel that kind of my situation kind of allows me to have more access to opportunities and resources that people with more severe stuttering may not be able to. So research for me is mostly experimental. So we set up a study in a room in front of a computer, and participant will interact with the computer. So that kind of experiment is more streamlined. So the element or the component of the researcher is more removed. And the environment, we want that to be more controlled, so that from participant to participant, they receive the same stimuli. So you're confident that their performance are not influenced by those factors. So my barrier in doing research is that when I was starting out as a undergraduate student trying to get into research, the positions that's available are mostly research assistants that are responsible to run this type of experiments. And sometimes I am concerned about, would I be qualified for those roles? Because if a project have multiple research assistants and my speech pattern may be different from others, and I wondered about like would I be qualified for those roles? And now when I'm a researcher, I try to, if I were to set up a study, I try to be the person who run the entire study instead of having somebody to take up a part of the research monitoring, so that all the participants receive kind of the same environment, the same person kind of deliver the stimuli. I guess that's my the barrier that I have that I experienced. Yeah, in terms of conducting the research.
Thank you for sharing that and naming those experiences. Either Jessica, would you like to jump in?
I'll just jump in quickly. I identify with multiple cognitive disabilities that slow down my focus and processing, executive functioning, fluency, which just means that things take me a lot longer to do. And so I have certain kind of technologies that help me receive the information, like audio, text to speech. But I think the biggest barrier really is this time issue. And so I end up actually saying no to a lot of opportunities and projects because I know that I'm not on my own capable of doing that particular work. And so I'll stop there, but yeah, that's a brief.
So similar to Jessica, this Jessica. Autism is a spectrum, as we know. So there's a lot of different ways it can present in the world. For me personally, my primary impacts are executive function, and then sensory integration, which is like, we're talking, yay, and then all of a sudden I can't hear anymore because it's just like I can see your mouth moving and then it's gone. And there's you have lots of different senses, more than 5. And then not all of them are integrated in me, maybe in you. And then something called narrative coherence, which basically means that we uptake the same kind of information from our surroundings. So if we both look at a situation, there's a normative way to view it. And I don't necessarily have that. And so what I have found, and I don't view any of these as lax, by the way, I just want to be very careful about that, but we are talking about disability impacts in an environment that is built for neurotypical minds that are considered cognitively excellent and superior. And so a lot of the ways that the environment of the institution is set up is in very particular ways for very particular formulations of mind, and I don't fit those. So a lot of the barriers that I encounter, as Jessica said, are around executive function. I have pretty deep impacts, and what I think is the most, or has been the most kind of astonishing for me, is all of the places that things like prioritization, memory, time. So there is executive dysfunction is also called time blindness. I don't promote that term, but it is, when I found it, I was just like, aha, yeah, that tracks. And so prioritization is an email, and when you're reading a book and then you're having to like do your notes, it takes me 3 to 5 times longer because you're trying to organize information in a particular way, right? And so there's hierarchical, you're creating hierarchical systems of knowledge that you're trying to figure out how to access later. There are lots of things around summary or around how we interact with colleagues, all of those things that are essentially non-apparent to most people become little sticking places where at the end of the day, what I have felt in the past that I have been able to get done, or the ways in which my research is going to evolve, simply takes more time, and I can't find things, and people are like, well, just put it in a notebook. I'm like, I don't remember what notebook it's in because working memory, not a thing. I'm like, is it in the red one? Is it in the blue one? I don't know. So for me, a lot of what I have had to do is create systems and compile tools that allow me to have a searchable brain that exists outside of my brain, that doesn't depend on certain features that people take for granted, like being able to create prioritization, hierarchy, all of those things. Yeah, so those are that's what it is.
Thanks, Jess. I share impacts and experiences with all 4 of you. And I think one thing I want to name before I present the last question and we discuss ways that we have changes we have made or things we would recommend to make research more accessible, is that our body-mind differences that you all have just named as sort of part of your experience, to me, is what also makes us great researchers and great academics, scholars, and educators, is because we do experience the world in different ways. We move through the world in different ways. Our mind and bodies work in different ways that allow us to have a unique perspective or a unique entry point into the work we do as academics. And that's where there's inherent value there. And as Jessica was mentioned, so often people think about disability as a deficit. And I certainly, and many of us I know in this room, are advocating of disability to be thought of as a value added to all spaces, in particular academic spaces. And so with that, I want to pick up from Jess's last kind of comment and think about what you have created or what's been helpful for you institutionally to make research more accessible, or what you would recommend to other researchers, other department leaders, university leaders, to help make our research processes and practices here at the U more accessible for everyone. And maybe we could just go in that same order, start with you, Erin, and go on.
Great. So I've been working on 2 projects, and the first one, and this gets into an answer to your question. The first one was started when everything shut down for the pandemic. I teach ethnographic research methods, which is undergraduate and graduate students. And typically in this class, students go to their own field sites and do research during the semester and practice different research skills, like interviewing and transcribing and coding and taking field notes, all of these things. When that couldn't happen for everybody, in this large class, I recreated the sort of research design of the project to both work around my access needs and theirs in the pandemic, which was we all had issues with accessibility in new ways. So I designed a project about my neighborhood, which meant that I could do this research at home or nearby home. And I facilitated remote research for my students. And I did that, Lattice was part of this. Lattice, the libraries, university archives, there was people really stepped up in CLA to support this wild dreaming of a research project. And so I did things like put a GoPro camera on and walk around the neighborhood. And so students are practicing from these videos that I create, very basic skills with observing and interpreting what they're seeing. What was really interesting, I found, was when they were writing their field notes, and they would share their field notes because students go into the field alone, so they don't have opportunities usually to share or think about observing the same things. They really had to think like, wow, look at what I missed or what I noticed and how did I get there? Like, that's really interesting. So they all were sort of like in my body going around doing this research. And we also facilitated an archival research this way with the GoPro camera, and we digitized the files. And so students sort of got a virtual visit to the archives, but then had access to the files during the pandemic. Part of the way I thought about this is that students and we provided access for each other. And I built the model around complementary capacities, which is something that I got out of disability justice, working with the Critical Disability Studies Collective on campus, which is that if we're doing this research together, there will be fluctuations of capacities. People have kids, they're taking care of parents, they're You know, there's a lot going on in people's lives. I'm sick and can't do it. And actually, my partner, Miranda Joseph, who is on, has been my collaborator in this project. But when we have lots of people who are doing the ethnographic research together, not only do you get the insights that you wouldn't get necessarily on your own, but somebody can pick up the research and keep it going, which is really important if somebody isn't available. So it doesn't rely on one person's body mind, but also I stopped having them write field notes separately and started having them write field notes together. And so when somebody couldn't make it because people got COVID, there was, times when they were out on medical leave for other reasons or had stuff going on, they would still read through the notes and still get a sense of what was happening, even if they didn't do the 2-hour video. And so they could keep up with research in a different way. And that was really important. So like the notes, instead of being like major things, they've read more like visual cues for people who are blind or low vision if you're watching a movie. And that was another way of like thinking about, if somebody can't watch the video, because I had students, because since I have arthritis, I can't really walk like this sometimes. And they're like, whoa, this is like a Blair Witch Project kind of a film. And so it would make them queasy, so they couldn't watch it. But it was built with the idea that potentially there would be students involved with research who were blind or low vision, and that there would be a transcript created by peers already. And so it doesn't rely on somebody like having all these attributes in their one body of the sort of hypermobile researcher that I talked about before. What we found, that means that like Miranda and I and these students, right, over 30 students now, and some new students have been working on this project. We've been able to do research during the pandemic, which is awesome. And that was enabled a lot by technology and things that were provided by the university. And so that's really super helpful. But one of the things that I've come up against, though, as we try to present the research or as we're applying for residencies to write, is that everything is for one researcher and not two or more in the humanities and mostly in the social sciences too. And so I have really thought, like, if these collaborative research structures, which now I've adopted, I'm doing a research project with multiple collaborators doing interviews with disabled anthropologists, people can sort of pick up the pieces that are easier for them in those collaborations, but then what do we do when the structures are built for one? And where I think that could really be changed if we're thinking about building capacity is in how we do our graduate admissions, and thinking about people applying together to do research together. And this is more of a sciences model approach, but it works in this way. And so, yeah, I feel like I had some other things to say, but that's a lot already. So I should let the next person go.
Yeah, I can pick up from there. So I guess for my type of disability, the barrier that I mentioned earlier about the concern of not being qualified for those entry-level type of research opportunity is I think it's to begin with, it's a kind of self-imposed barrier that I don't know what other people think, so I don't pursue those opportunities, and and also don't know if I belong in that environment. So I think, and I know that it's a competitive environment, and each and we all bring something to the table, but it's also a selective process. But I think maybe for people who just start out doing research, maybe at the for university undergraduate students during their orientations, there could be a workshop on disability or a component on that, so that students with disability, when they start out, they know that research is possible and that they can just go for those opportunities. And so some PIs or some researchers may say no if students with disability apply to work for them, but some may say yes. And the people who say no may not be because they are at least I feel they're not discriminating against people with disability, but they may be at a situation they cannot provide accommodation, they cannot they just not have the bandwidth to do that yet. But there are some people who are ready to take on student researchers who have disability. But if students do not apply for those opportunities, they will never have access to those. So I think having those training early on to undergraduate students will be really, really helpful. Yeah.
I guess I'll jump in here. I think for me, the most helpful tactic I've used is to do collaborative work. And I know we and many people have published and written about this, and I just think I want to kind of say it again, that collaboration here is a really key CRIP tactic. It's one I've been in, I mean, the last 3 publications I've had have been co-authored. I just co-curated an exhibition. There's so many reasons why collaborative work is critical, including it just creates, in my opinion, better work. I do think, though, there's a way in which, for me, and I'm a postdoc, I'm here for 2 years and I've just gotten here, so I'm not exactly sure of all the resources yet. But let's say that I do want to do a single authored piece. How can, or like what support structures could be put in place for me to do that, if that's something I want to do, if I decide that's an important project. And for me, it would look like having essentially a research assistant to work with me. How would that happen as a postdoc? I'm not sure. I know that faculty can often apply and have access to a research assistant. But I think it also is something that might be helpful, not just for, say, postdocs, but also graduate students attempting to finish the just ultimately and always, for whatever reason, solo project, right? Like, I know for me and for some of my other colleagues who have different cognitive disabilities, it means that we stay in graduate school a lot longer, which is a huge financial burden. And so if there were places, and maybe there are, so please let me know if I'm missing something, where you could have a research assistant, and like a substantial one, not just, you know, someone who'd come in and dedicate like 10 hours once a semester, because let's face it, it takes 10 hours just to work with someone to get, you know, involved in your research process. So that to me would be, you know, 2 things. One, collaborate. That's a great way to get things done. But if you want to do a solo project, we should be able to do that. And in order to do that, we need assistance. So, yeah.
Thank you. Jessica? Yeah.
So yes to everything that has been said so far. It's I find it particularly challenging, especially in the humanities, but also the social sciences, the idea that this being wedded to the idea of individual merit and individual merit linked to what is legible to the university for advancement, for tenure, for retention, for all of those things. When the kind of siloing that can happen in an individual researcher, because it's your perspective and your mind, that is, we see that the impacts of that in the world so much now, whereas like collaborative thinking really pulls you out of your own mind and into a kind of shared space that can be, as Erin was pointing out, like I see things, you see things, we perceive different things about this reality, and together we create a better map that is more flexible and frankly more generous. So I am very, very much about collaboration in classrooms, in research, and just in doing university things together. Angela introduced me as her work wife, right? Like, and that's not just a nice story or like, hey, we're super good friends. Like, we have spent years working together in order to accomplish some pretty awesome things at this university. And so I just wanted to kind of, you know, accentuate those threads before I say the things that I'm going to say, which have been about how do I survive in the humanities, which is based on individual merit, when so many of the things that would make me legible to the university are not things that I can really do by myself. So one is a very straightforward one, and I'll say this before I get fully into what it means to do digital knowledge management. And that is, in my graduate school education, and when I was in all of the new faculty meetings and presentations, you know, in CFDD faculty success program, I went through the dissertation success program, which is essentially the faculty success program with a few less bells and whistles. So that is named and put out there in the universe as the thing, and everybody swears by it. Like, it helped us do all of the things. Our lives are so much better. Like, I mean, it just glowing reports. When I went through the dissertation success program, I found it to be inaccessible for people who are neurodiverse. It is built for neurotypical success. But the university will pay for it. When I was trying to build a lot of the systems for myself, what's going to work for me, I stumbled upon a program called Building a Second Brain. I learned years later that Building a Second Brain was started by a person who had essentially a viral brain injury, and so found himself to be neurodiverse, and so built systems of interacting with and managing knowledge and creating and accomplishing projects and things like that were built on essentially the structures of neurodiversity rather than neurotypicality. That program is as expensive as the faculty success program, but I had to pay out of pocket for that. In order for me to be successful, this program, which is actually very well received and lauded across multiple industries, was something that was not available to me or supported or legible to the university, because I am not legible to the university as a neurodiverse researcher who has particular research needs. And if you want the kind of knowledge that my very awesome paradox tolerance, non-collapsing brain can do with these things that I do in my research, like, it has to be supported in particular ways. And those ways, I can borrow tools from the Faculty Success Program, but they are not that program in and of itself, because it's so dependent on executive function, among other things, is not for a lot of neurodiverse people. And so that would be an easy entry point. The second thing is one of the most helpful conversations that I ever had in my postdoc, actually, was trying to figure out in what ways exactly did my executive function impact my research. So where exactly was I losing time? And so what I found was, there's a lot of acceptance. So as, is it Lay? I'm sorry, yes, Lay said, some of that is like my own perception of myself and what I think I should be able to do. But a lot of it is, once you go through that acceptance process, what are you kind of left with? So for me, I only work with digital text now. And the reason I only work with digital text now is because there are programs that allow me to say, read a Kindle book, and then automatically extract my annotations from Kindle and then dump them into my digital notes, right? So instead of me having to retranscribe my notes, which takes anybody a lot of time, but is going to take me forever, I now have automated certain processes that mean that I don't lose that time. I learned how to do keywords for keyword searches appropriately, and then map those across my citation manager, right? Map them across my digital notes, map them across lots of different areas of my life, such that I can always pull up information no matter what. And I teach those keyword searches to my students, and it is life-changing, because knowledge that you acquired, I take for granted that knowledge that I acquired last year is no longer in my brain. But for a lot of people, it's just like, oh yeah, I did read that article that you stumble across in a different context, and like, wait, how does this apply now to this new thing? Wait. So if you have a library, right, of keyword searches that already connect all of these kinds of information together as a kind of like, web, then you don't have to depend on your memory or context. If you look up a keyword for a completely different article that you're writing or project that you're working on, it's going to pull in all of that information that's related to that. And there you have your notes that you've already processed and all of those things. A lot of it was learning how to take effective notes. And so there's something called the Zettelkasten method that I highly recommend for everyone, but neurodiverse researchers particularly, because it depends on a very quick, hard processing of summarization of the text, but then it builds out ideas from that in your own words into essentially chunks of writing. And it is much simpler to do than the kind of ad hoc, figure it out, write things in the margins, and then where do they go? You can't access them anymore. Kind of note-taking process. So the ways in which I have been supported by the university is that so I started in gender, women's, and sexuality studies, and I'm now in English for my postdoc. My librarians know who I am. I have a running doc of, I need this, I need a digital copy of this book, I need a digital copy of this book. Like, can we do that? Oh, if we can't do that, how do we? So they know, they know. And so a lot of that became even more prevalent in the pandemic, where we needed digital copies of text even more, and suddenly things were more available digitally. That just made my life a lot easier. And I think makes a lot of people's lives easier. So once you start learning some of the digital systems that allow essentially everything to communicate with each other in a way that doesn't depend on you and your memory, right? And last point, we're really bad as humans at manipulating things in our minds. Like, try to solve a puzzle in your mind and then like give yourself puzzle pieces and manipulate them out in space. It's a lot easier to do it out here. So this lauding of I set and think like thought is actually inefficient. Like, if you get it out of your brain onto paper, right? There's a reason journaling is great, right? You get it onto paper, you get it where you can move stuff around, where you can see it and work with it, you're actually going to be better at doing things with it, right? Than trying to hard process it in your mind. So that's one of the things I discovered is once I wasn't dependent upon trying to keep everything in my brain and hold it, then I actually did better work. Because the modality allowed different things, or the modalities that I was using allowed different things than me and my brain sitting in a room and processing. So I'll conclude there.
Thanks. There's a note from the from Jessica Cooley. I'm trying really hard not to call you to the other Jessica. Could you list out the methods and tech you were using and let us know where you learned how to use them in the chat, or follow up on some of that? I particularly lost the note taking, the title of the types of notes that you said. So if you could write that in the chat, that would be helpful. And we have about 7 minutes for Q&A. So I want to kind of open it up and see if there are folks that have questions. I was also trying to take notes of some of the things that and synthesize some of the things that I was hearing from you all in terms of what was helpful or what could be helpful, more institutionalized support for research methods and software and digital software that's specifically useful or effective for non-abled or neuroatypical body minds is one of the things that I heard resonate across comments. But I'll pause now and see if there are any questions from the audience for our panelists. Aaron, did you want to say something? No, you don't want to say something?
I'm just going to say it's a quiet group.
I wanted to invite folks to mention anything else that you might want to share and didn't have a chance to, if there are no questions.
Abby, you turned your camera on. Do you have a question?
Yes, I actually was very curious about I was reading this Building a Second Brain kind of system, and I feel like I don't quite still understand it, but I was wondering if I believe Jessica, you were the one talking about it, correct? Yes, excellent. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about kind of that and how that's sort of what aspects of it have kind of helped you, I guess.
So Building a Second Brain is a program or a way of managing knowledge. And they teach you, by the way, about a lot of these systems. So I was a little angry when I found it because I did a lot of this work on like note taking and all of this like long before I found it, and it made a lot of these things much more simple. But what Building a Second Brain does is it doesn't depend on inherent senses of prioritization. So it understands and says, okay, chances are you're going, and it doesn't also distinguish between like your real life and your job, which is really important for a lot of us with executive dysfunction. What it does is it delineates things as simply projects. And it says, for most of us, believe it or not, if you sat down and wrote it down, you have between 10 or 15 projects, anything that you're working on, whether it's like painting your house or like finishing an article that you're all doing at the same time. And what it does is it teaches you to think about knowledge as related to those things as all woven together. And it shows you where to foreground knowledge and where to background it. It teaches you different ways to engage with knowledge based on the kind of outcomes that you need to get. So for things that are like an article where you're just churning through lots of text that is immediately going to be useful, that's different from something like being doing service work, right? That is kind of a maintenance thing, or returning to teaching stuff. So this is how I processed it. So it gives you different ways of framing the way that you're going to interact with the knowledge, the way you're going to store and access the knowledge, and the ways you're going to manage your time. And I put that in very loose quotations, but how do you continue to touch things such that they come into, or they stay within your purview when you need them, but also are able to access them if they're archived later, where you're like, hey, how do I not lose the knowledge that I've spent so much time processing? It also actually maps to most of our reading and research habits as researchers. So we're constantly reading things like articles on the internet. We're constantly like processing information, like just randomly. You're going to lose that, right? So how do you store it quickly someplace that will allow you to keep that random thing that you read on the Chronicle of Higher Ed 5 years ago that is suddenly relevant, and you're like, wait, somewhere. So, and to do that, it has built an interlocking set of modalities around essentially knowledge that, around the idea that knowledge that is digitized becomes transposable. They don't say that, that's how I say it. It's transposable, and once it becomes transposable, you can move it and do anything you like with it. And so it takes advantage of like the digital world in a way that means that you're interfacing with that knowledge in ways that mean that knowledge in a book, you have to take it and do something with it, right? Like it's stuck in the book. But once you get it out of that text and into a digital environment, you can do so many other things with it. And so beginning to think about knowledge in those ways is really, really useful. And it also reduces the amount of executive function needed to do. I don't have to remember things. I have to remember keywords, right? And so, and I go back to keywords because it's the most easily legible, but there's a lot of things like that that mean I get to spend more time doing certain kinds of labor with my brain that isn't this other kind of labor with my brain that is in the background. Erin.
I was thinking, I had a thought that was like this, that every time I'm in a space with other disabled people, right? I'm like one of the ones who loves faculty success program, by the way. They're like, you might be disabled. And I was like, what do you mean I might be disabled? Like that was a really interesting thing to happen in that program. But every time I'm in a space, I learn about like a disability space, I learn about different body minds and processing and how people move in the world. And one of the things I think would be really helpful is the university really truly acknowledging that disability is an important part of the diversity, not just of the student body, but of the entire university community. And one of the things, I mean, we've all talked about how resource intensive like all of our hacks are to make research accessible for ourselves and for other people. And what I'd like is actually fellowships and grants available to disabled researchers, which happens now increasingly for disabled artists and writers. And I think that would be a way of showing a value of that kind of diversity and the things that we're doing, and the kind of labor and creative work that we're doing on this side of the process. Like all of Jess's mini brains.
I agree with that. I want to knowing that we are past time, and so I certainly recognize and understand why people are needing to jump off of our Zoom, and I want to honor and respect everyone's time today. Erin, you also had one last question. I think that you asked if we could go around and list one thing in a brief comment that would support greater access in research. I'm wondering if we could do that quickly as a closing and end our time together today. Do folks feel open to that? And if you don't have anything, that's fine too. Erin, do you want to go first, since you posited the question, and I've been volunteering you to go first all afternoon?
Sure. Yeah. And that's it. I mean, I did just make a little note, but also there were so many people were really excited about technology before and access to technology before the pandemic. And now people are like, no, 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 no. And just like recognizing that that technology has enabled people's research and academic lives is really important. And so I put in the note, like, it's getting harder to teach asynchronous online courses or online courses in CLA. And that's essential space. And so just like actually going back to pre-pandemic openness to these kinds of technology and being on the cutting edge of using those things, I think would be helpful.
I'll jump in with mine real quick and let the three of you have another moment to think. Similarly, the thing that would make research more accessible to me is policy shifts, not necessary technology. Yes. And I am constantly trying to prioritize learning more about all the things you all have mentioned in that software tech support that I could use, but policy shifts around the tenure track process, for instance, time to degree for graduate students, all kinds of funding related to this, of course. But even if we change policies and practices, that would make a big difference for folks like me who, as some of you have named, need more time to do things and can show and have shown success individually and collaboratively, but cannot do it in the intense time, like shortening of everything in academia. And so disabled scholars and educators are pushed out because of policies and practices, and then we are not supported because of the lack of things like funding and research support that works for our body mind. So that's my suggestion, and I can get into specifics for anybody who wants to know, but I would love to hear from Lei and from the Jessicas as we close our time today.
Yeah, I think also something we mentioned earlier is about collaboration. I think maybe have a structured environment for researchers with disability to collaborate, so that and I think in the broader disability community that people help each other out. So I can be, if you cannot see, I can be your eye, and if you cannot talk, I can talk for you. I think there is like strengthening like community, and like researchers can collaborate and they can kind of put their strength together to compete with other researchers for grants. I think if there's a structure there to facilitate that collaboration, I think that would be very helpful.
And I just want to quickly kind of bolster what Angela was saying about the need for shifts in policy and structural issues. I think sometimes technology gets used as what is in fact an expensive but an easy solve, saying like, oh, okay, well, we got this whole technology thing problem solved, when in fact that's just sort of like one nice way to get things moving along. And the real shifts need to be, you know, at the policy structural level for sure.
And I think, yes, for disabled researchers, but I will actually just broaden it generally, because the kind of timelines to X, right, are really set up for people who already have a ton of support. What happens is, what I find happens is that the university continues to reproduce the same kinds of things that have always been successful. It doesn't, we're like, we want to ask new questions. Well, to ask new questions, you need people with different kinds of minds, different kinds of life experiences. But if you haven't set up a system, a policy system that allows for those minds to flourish, because you're constantly retrofitting, you know, or there aren't resources allocated, then what happens is, in order to succeed, these people with these different kinds of numerous different life experiences have to only succeed in ways that have already been pre-established, and therefore have less friction with the university. And therefore, we don't actually produce new thought or new knowledge, new systems and ways of thinking about the world, or we do it at great cost to ourselves. And then, you know, that we don't get to stay in the university environments as much. And so I think that it's not just about adding an extra year because you have a disabled family member like thing, or you birthed the baby or did the things, right? So now you get an extra year to tenure. That's great, but it's still the exact same structure with just a little more time. A little more time is great. But thinking about some of these other things, like what does collaboration look like? What are and how do we merit that? The university has actually a really awesome system for having like publicly engaged knowledge be a pathway to tenure. That's awesome. And how do we promote more of that work and make it more legible to departments as like viable ways, like, please, like, vote on this. We want this work to be continued in the world. I was told about it, and then I was also discouraged from doing it for my promotion to associate, right? Do that for full. So some things like that I would say are, it's not just about more time or more resources. It is about doing a lot of the work that we say that the university wants to do, because it wants to ask new questions and produce new knowledge. And to do that, we have to not create space, but like create living conditions and working conditions for the kinds of people that would be able to who are able to produce that knowledge that is vital to the university and its flourishing and its futurity. So,
well, thank you all for staying 10 minutes past our time, and thank you to the panelists, Dean Meyer, CLA Research, Lattice, the libraries, everybody who's been involved in making this panel happen this afternoon. I always get so much from being in conversation with other disabled thinkers. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.